They were told Americans would torture them, violate them, leave them to die in shame. But when 73 Japanese women stepped into that tiled room in San Francisco, October 1945, the enemy broke them, not with violence, but with something they had not experienced in 8 months: hot water that smelled like lavender. Americans who looked at them like human beings. The woman who broke first was a nurse named Michiko. She had amputated limbs with dull saws, had watched soldiers die from infections, had been taught Americans were devils without souls. But when the American captain, a man who had every reason to hate her, handed her a bar of white soap and said, "Take your time," Michiko did something she had not done since capture. She cried. What happened when 73 enemy women discovered the propaganda was backwards. When prisoners ate better than their own families, when the guards showed more mercy than their own officers, the answer would transform not just their lives, but how they understood the entire war. This is the story of how kindness became a weapon, how American values defeated hatred without firing a shot, and how a facility commander who had lost his only son chose to honor that son's memory, not through revenge, but through something much harder: treating the enemy the way Americans are supposed to treat everyone. If you are interested in the untold stories of World War II that reveal what truly made America great, the values our fathers and grandfathers fought to preserve, make sure to like this video and subscribe. These are the stories that prove American exceptionalism was not propaganda. It was real, and it still matters today. Captain Robert Henderson sat at his desk, staring at the photograph. Lieutenant Robert Henderson, Jr., 23 years old in his dress uniform, taken 3 weeks before Iwo Jima, 3 weeks before a Japanese mortar round ended everything. The orders on his desk were clear: 73 Japanese female prisoners of war arriving tomorrow. Nurses, clerks, radio operators, non-combatants. To be processed, held, eventually repatriated per Geneva Convention. Geneva Convention. The rules his son had died defending. The rules that separated America from the barbarians. Dutch had seen the reports from liberated Japanese prisoner of war camps. American boys starved to skeletons, beaten, worked to death, denied medical care. Bataan, death march with thousands dead. Manila with nurses bayoneted. Cabanatuan with men dying from dysentery in their own filth. These women wore the same uniform as the soldiers who had bayoneted nurses in Manila, who had starved thousands of Allied prisoners, who had forced Korean and Filipino women into sexual slavery. Every rational part of him wanted to see them suffer. It would be so easy. These women were the enemy. Their countrymen had killed his boy, killed thousands of American boys, tortured prisoners, committed atrocities across Asia. He could make their lives hell within Geneva guidelines. Minimum rations, no heat, no privileges, cold water only, the barest medical care, legal, justified, deserved. But Bobby's last letter sat in the desk drawer. Dutch pulled it out, read it again, though he had memorized every word. "Dad, I have seen things out here that would make you sick. What they do to prisoners, to civilians. It is evil. But I have also seen what we become when we answer evil with evil. Some of our boys, they have stopped seeing the enemy as human, and I watch them lose pieces of themselves every time they choose cruelty over mercy. I do not want to die like that. If I do not make it home, I want to die knowing I fought to preserve something worth preserving. Not just to defeat Japan, but to prove America stands for something better." The Geneva Convention, Tim, that is what we are fighting for. The idea that even in war there are rules, that we can be warriors without being monsters, that we treat prisoners with dignity because we value dignity, not because they deserve it. Promise me if you ever have power over prisoners, you will remember that. Promise me you will show them what America actually is, not what their propaganda told them we were. That is how we really win. Not just militarily, morally. Do not let them make you cruel. That is how they win, even if we beat them. Dutch folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the drawer. Tomorrow, 73 Japanese women would arrive expecting torture. They would get something else entirely. Not because Dutch had forgiven them, not because he did not grieve his son every single day, but because Bobby had asked him to be better. And if Dutch could not give his son life, he could at least give him the legacy of a father who honored his dying wish. He called for Major Hayes. "Elizabeth, get me updated on our facility preparations." I want those women to arrive to everything Geneva Convention requires, and then some. Hot showers, clean clothes, full rations. Medical care, heat, everything. Sir, some of the men will not like it. I do not care what they like. I care what is right. These women are prisoners under American protection now. And Americans do not torture prisoners. We do not starve them. We do not violate them, even when they have earned it, especially when they have earned it. Understood, sir. This is an order, Major. We will treat these prisoners with dignity, not because I like them, but because that is what my son died defending, and I will not dishonor his sacrifice by becoming what the enemy claimed we were. The women stood on the deck that morning, their uniforms stiff with months of sweat and dirt. The fabric had become like cardboard crusty with salt and grime chafing against skin that had grown sensitive from poor nutrition and constant irritation. Some were nurses who had tended wounded soldiers on islands that no longer existed under Japanese control. They had amputated limbs with inadequate anesthesia, had watched young men die from infections. They had no medicine to treat, had worked 20-hour days in field hospitals that were nothing more than tents pitched in mud. Others had been clerks, their fingers stained with ink from typing endless reports that would never matter now. Radio operators who had transmitted desperate messages about supplies that never came and reinforcements that never arrived. Cooks who had tried to make meals from weevil-infested rice and scraps of fish gone bad in the tropical heat. A few had been civilians, teachers or administrators, or merchant daughters caught in the wrong place when American forces advanced like an unstoppable tide across the Pacific. Now they were prisoners, the first large group of Japanese women to be held in American custody. And they had no idea what awaited them. They had heard stories whispered in the night, warnings from soldiers who claimed to know what Americans did to captured women. The stories were horrific, designed to make women prefer death to surrender. But surrender had not been their choice. They had been captured when their positions were overrun, swept up in the chaos of Japan's collapse, transported like cargo across an ocean that felt vast and indifferent. Their hair hung in greasy tangles matted with sweat and the residue of unwashed weeks. Lice crawled across scalps that itched constantly, maddeningly. The urge to scratch was unbearable. But scratching only made it worse, opening small wounds that could become infected. Some women had developed rashes from the lice bites, angry red welts that covered their scalps and the backs of their necks. Others had given up scratching entirely, had learned to endure the constant crawling sensation as just another misery to be borne. The smell of unwashed bodies filled the cramped spaces below deck where they had huddled during the 3-week voyage across the Pacific. It was a smell they had grown accustomed to, the sharp tang of old sweat mixed with the mustiness of clothes that had not been properly cleaned in months. It clung to everything, to their clothes, to their skin, to the very air they breathed. Some had tried to wash with salt water, pulled up in buckets, but it left their skin sticky and covered in a thin white residue when it dried. The salt stung in the cuts and scrapes that covered their hands and feet, making the washing worse than useless. If they were going to die anyway, if the Americans were going to kill them, or worse, what did it matter if they were clean? Some women no longer noticed their own smell. Their senses had adapted to it, made it background noise. But others were acutely aware of it, ashamed of how far they had fallen from the standards of cleanliness they had been taught since childhood. One woman, Machiko, a former nurse from Osaka, wrote in a hidden diary she had managed to keep throughout her capture. The diary was tiny, no bigger than her palm, with pages so thin they were almost translucent. She wrote in pencil, the characters cramped and tiny to save space. Her entry for that morning read, "We smell like animals. Perhaps the Americans will treat us as such. I cannot remember the last time I felt truly clean. My skin itches everywhere. My hair feels dead. I look at my hands and barely recognize them as my own. They are so dirty and cracked. What will they do to us? I am more afraid than I have ever been." The ship docked under gray October skies that threatened rain. The air was cool, much cooler than the tropical islands where most of them had been captured, and they shivered in their thin uniforms. San Francisco rose in the distance like something from a dream. Buildings intact and gleaming white in the weak morning sun. A city untouched by bombs or fire or the scars of war. Skyscrapers reached toward the clouds. Windows caught the light and reflected it back like mirrors. Bridges spanned the bay in graceful arcs of steel. The women stared in silence, trying to comprehend what they were seeing. Their own cities were rubble and ash. Tokyo had burned in firestorms that turned night into day. Osaka had burned until the canals boiled. Nagasaki and Hiroshima were gone, entirely erased by weapons beyond imagination. Weapons that had turned people into shadows, burned onto walls. But here stood America, whole and thriving, prosperous and undamaged, as if the war had happened on another planet, entirely in some other reality that had not touched this place. American sailors lined the gangway as the women were let off the ship. Young men in crisp uniforms, their faces tanned and healthy, their eyes following the prisoners with expressions the women could not read. The prisoners walked slowly, legs unsteady after weeks at sea, muscles weak from poor nutrition and lack of exercise. Each step felt uncertain, as if the solid ground might give way beneath them. They kept their eyes cast down in shame and fear, not wanting to meet the Americans' gazes, afraid of what they might see there. They wore the remnants of their uniforms, clothes that had once been practical and neat, but were now little more than rags. Gray skirts torn at the hems and stained with mud, and worse. White blouses that had yellowed with age and sweat, some with buttons missing, others with sleeves torn. Practical shoes that had worn through at the soles, held together with string or wire or sheer determination. The better off among them wore socks with holes. The worse off had feet wrapped in strips of cloth. Some clutched small bags containing their only possessions. A photograph perhaps, or a letter from home, or some small personal item they had managed to keep through the chaos of capture and transport. Others had nothing at all, not even memories of home that were not too painful to think about. They were what they carried in their minds and nothing more. Stripped of everything, reduced to simply themselves, bodies and souls waiting to discover what fate the victors had in store for the vanquished. The sailors watched them pass in silence. The women braced for jeers, for spitting, for the visceral hatred they had been taught to expect from the enemy. They tensed, waiting for the first insult, the first act of violence. Some had their shoulders hunched, as if expecting blows. Others walked with rigid backs, determined to face whatever came with as much dignity as they could muster. But the Americans simply looked at them with expressions that were maddeningly hard to read. Some seemed curious, their eyes tracking the prisoners with the same interest they might show a group of refugees from some distant land. Others appeared uncomfortable, as if unsure how to react to enemy women who looked more pathetic than dangerous, more pitiable than threatening. A few looked away entirely, perhaps seeing mothers or sisters in these bedraggled prisoners, perhaps feeling something like shame at their reduced state. There was no violence, no shouting, no hatred made visible. Just an awkward silence as enemy and captor occupied the same space and tried to make sense of what that meant. Buses waited on the dock, olive green military vehicles with windows and seats. Military police officers, both men and women, directed the prisoners to board. The women climbed the steps carefully, unused to such treatment. In their experience, prisoners were marched, prodded, forced. But these Americans simply gestured, held the door, waited patiently for the slow procession of weak and frightened women to board. Inside, the seats were cushioned with worn but intact vinyl. The windows were clean, offering clear views of the world outside. There were even curtains, faded and simple but present. The floor had been swept. The bus smelled of diesel and cleaning solution, sharp and chemical, but not unpleasant. As the buses pulled away from the waterfront, engines rumbling, the women pressed their faces to the glass, watching the American city roll past like scenes from a movie they were not sure they believed. Everything looked impossible, surreal, like propaganda in reverse. Grocery stores lined the streets, their windows displaying food in abundance that made some women gasp aloud. Pyramids of oranges gleaming and perfect. Shelves of canned goods stacked in floor to ceiling. Hanging meat visible through glass. Signs advertising prices that seemed reasonable, affordable, accessible to ordinary people. Children rode bicycles down streets with no bomb craters, no rubble, no tank traps or defensive positions. They wore warm coats and moved with the careless confidence of children who had never known hunger or fear. Women walked freely in bright dresses, reds and blues and yellows, that seemed almost garish to eyes accustomed to military drab and the gray dust of ruins. They carried shopping bags, actual shopping bags full of purchases made for pleasure, not survival. They laughed with each other, stopped to chat on street corners, moved through their days with an ease that spoke of lives untouched by war's direct hand. There was no rubble anywhere, no burned-out buildings with their roofs caved in and walls blackened by fire. No desperate crowds fighting for rations outside distribution centers. No signs of privation or suffering or the grinding daily struggle to survive that had become normal in Japan. The contrast with their homeland's devastation was so complete, so overwhelming that some of the prisoners wondered if this was real or some elaborate trick. Perhaps this was a movie set, a facade designed to demoralize them. Perhaps behind these perfect streets lay the same ruin that existed everywhere else. But the bus kept moving and the perfection continued. Block after block of intact buildings, functioning businesses, people living normal lives. The evidence was undeniable. America was whole. America was thriving. While Japan lay in ruins, while their families picked through rubble for scraps, while children starved in the street, America looked like the war had been something that happened far away. An inconvenience perhaps, but nothing that had fundamentally changed the rhythm of daily life. The buses finally stopped at a military facility outside the city, surrounded by open land and distant hills. Guard towers stood at the corners, soldiers visible in them with rifles. Fences surrounded a compound of wooden buildings painted white, neat, and orderly. American flags snapped in the wind, stars and stripes that represented everything they had been taught to hate. The gates opened and the buses rolled through with a hiss of air brakes. This would be their home now. For however long the Americans decided to keep them. Days, weeks, months, years. No one knew. No one could say. They were prisoners at the mercy of the enemy, and mercy was not something they expected to receive. The women were led off the buses and through doors into a large processing building. The interior was clinical and clean floors polished to a shine, walls painted white. Inside, American nurses in crisp white uniforms waited with the clipboards, their hair pinned neatly under caps, their shoes polished and clean. The sight of the nurses confused the Japanese women immediately. Why would medical staff be here to process prisoners of war? What did this mean? Were they going to be experimented on? They had heard rumors about medical experiments, whispers about things done in camps, horrors inflicted in the name of science. Were they going to be examined for humiliation, stripped naked and mocked, photographed as examples of the defeated enemy? Or were they going to be used for some purpose, too terrible to imagine, too shameful to speak aloud? The possibilities ran through their minds like poison, each worse than the last. One by one their names were recorded. Characters carefully written in English transliteration, checked and double-checked. Height and weight measured on scales that seemed precise and well-maintained. Basic medical checks performed by nurses who wore gloves and used clean instruments. Temperature taken with glass thermometers that were sterilized between patients. Blood pressure measured with cuffs that were wrapped carefully around thin arms. Eyes examined with small flashlights. Throats checked with wooden depressors. The American nurses worked efficiently, but not unkindly. They spoke in English that the prisoners mostly could not understand, but the tone was professional, almost gentle. Voices were soft, movements careful. No one was struck, no one was violated, no one was mocked or humiliated. The examination was clinical, respectful, bewildering in its normality. This was not the degradation they had expected. This was simply medical screening, the kind that might happen anywhere to anyone. When their names were called, each woman stepped forward with dread in her heart, certain this was where the cruelty would begin. But each woman returned with the same confused expression, unable to articulate what had just happened, because it was so far from expectation it did not fit into any mental category they possessed. Then came the instruction that stopped them cold, froze them in place with fresh fear. Through a translator, Dr. Helen Tanaka, a Japanese-American woman who spoke with a California accent, they were told to proceed to the bathing facility. The words hit like physical blows. This was it. This was where the cruelty would begin. They had heard stories about what happened to women prisoners in bathing facilities, whispered warnings about violation and shame, disguised as hygiene about American soldiers watching and laughing, and worse. Their hearts raced as they were led down a corridor toward a large set of double doors. The corridor was long, painted in pale green, lit by fluorescent lights that hummed softly. Their footsteps echoed on the linoleum floor. Some women held hands seeking comfort and human touch. Others walked alone, wrapped in their own fears. At the end of the corridor, the doors loomed large and white. An American officer, Major Elizabeth Hayes in her 40s with gray beginning to show in her brown hair, and crow's feet at the corners of kind eyes, reached for the door handle. The moment stretched eternal. Then the doors opened outward and warm air rushed out like a breath, carrying with it a smell that stopped the prisoners in their tracks. The smell hit them first. Soap and steam and something floral they could not immediately identify. It was lavender mixed with other herbs, a clean scent that was almost forgotten after months of unwashed bodies and stale air and the acrid smell of fear. The room beyond was tiled in white floor-to-ceiling, gleaming in the light of bright electric bulbs that hung from the ceiling in protective cages. The tiles reflected light until the whole room seemed to glow. Along one wall stood a row of individual shower stalls, more than 20 of them, each with chrome fixtures that caught the light. Along another wall were actual bathtubs, deep porcelain tubs with claw feet already filling with water from chrome taps. Steam rose in clouds, fogging the mirrors that hung along a third wall and making the air feel thick and clean and warm. The room was heated comfortably warm, the first truly warm place many of the women had been in months. The women froze in the doorway, bodies rigid, unable to process what they were seeing. This could not be real. This could not be for them. For 8 months they had washed with cold water from buckets, when they washed at all, splashing themselves clean as best they could. Never enough water to really wash. Never warm water to ease the process. They had grown used to the constant itch of lice, had learned to endure the greasy weight of unwashed hair, had accepted the smell of their own bodies as just another background misery of war that could not be changed. And now here were bathtubs, actual bathtubs with hot water steaming in the cool October air. Here were showers with multiple spray heads and chrome fixtures that looked brand new. Here were stacks of white towels, fluffy and clean, and folded neatly on wooden benches. Here were bars of soap arranged in dishes, white and smooth, and smelling of flowers. The contradiction between expectation and reality was so complete it felt like madness. Major Hayes addressed them through the translator, Dr. Tanaka. Her voice was calm and gentle. "You will bathe here. You will each receive soap, shampoo, towels, and clean clothes. Take your time. The water is hot. You are safe. No one will bother you. You have privacy here. This room is yours for as long as you need it." The words seemed impossible. Safe. Privacy. Take your time. When had they last experienced any of those things? Slowly, hesitantly, with trembling hands, the women began to undress. They had been taught modesty their entire lives, raised to believe that exposing one's body was shameful, that nakedness outside of marriage or the bathhouse was disgraceful. But months of war had stripped away many concerns. They had lived in close quarters with other women, had shared spaces too small for privacy, had learned that survival mattered more than modesty. Still, they watched the Americans nervously waiting for the trap to spring, for the mockery to begin, for guards to enter, and violation to commence. But the American nurses simply handed out towels and bars of white soap, moving efficiently along the line, their faces neutral and professional. Then they stepped back to give the prisoners privacy. "We will be outside if you need anything," the translator said. "Press this button if there is an emergency." She indicated a red button on the wall. Then the Americans left, closing the door behind them with a solid click that echoed in the tiled room. The women stood in the steaming room, bars of soap in their hands, hardly believing what they held. The soap was heavy, solid, substantial. It had weight and heft. It was not the thin, gritty soap they had known in Japan, soap that was more sawdust and clay than actual cleaning agent. This was real soap made from good ingredients designed to actually clean. Michiko turned her bar over and over in her hands, examining it from every angle. It was perfectly white, unmarked by the discoloration or impurities that had plagued Japanese soap for years. The surface was smooth and slightly damp from the humid air. She lifted it to her nose and smelled lavender, a scent so clean and pure it made her eyes sting. Tears sprang to her eyes unbidden. She had not smelled lavender since before the war, since summer days in her grandmother's garden when she was a child, and the world was safe and whole. Someone turned on a shower. The sound of water spraying from the nozzle broke the spell of stunned silence. Hot water, genuine hot water, steam rising instantly in white clouds. The woman under the spray gasped loudly, a sound halfway between a sob and a laugh. Then she began to cry in earnest tears, mixing with the spray of the shower, her whole body shaking with the release of months of tension and fear and the simple, overwhelming relief of being clean. Others rushed to the remaining showers, hands shaking as they turned handles, watching in disbelief as clean, hot water poured down from multiple spray heads. The water pressure was strong, the temperature perfect, hot enough to ease muscles and warm, chilled bodies, but not so hot as to burn. The sound of running water filled the room, mixing with the sounds of weeping as grown women cried like children, overwhelmed by the simple luxury of hot water. Michiko chose a bathtub drawn to it by memories of childhood baths, of family bathhouses, of a culture that had always valued the ritual of bathing. She turned the tap, marked with an H, and watched hot water rush in steaming and clear. The tub began to fill, the water rising with satisfying speed. When it was halfway full, she tested it with one hand. The heat was intense, almost scalding, but perfect. She stepped in carefully, lowering herself inch by inch into heat that felt almost painful after months of cold water and inadequate washing. The water rose around her as she sank down, enveloping her legs, her hips, her torso. It soaked into skin that had not known such luxury in so long, it felt like a lifetime. She slid down until the water covered her shoulders, until only her head remained above the surface. The heat penetrated deep into muscles that had been tense for months, relaxing knots she had not even known were there. And then she wept openly, unable to stop, unable to control the flood of emotions that broke free. Around the room, other women experienced their own private moments of breaking. They scrubbed their skin with the white soap, working up lather that was thick and creamy and real, watching months of grime wash away in gray streams. They shampooed their hair with liquid soap from dispensers mounted on the walls, working the lather through tangled matted hair, washing once, twice, 3 times, working out tangles and lice eggs and the accumulated filth of 8 months without proper washing. The water ran gray and then brown and finally clear as they scrubbed and rinsed and scrubbed again. They soaked in the tubs, letting heat penetrate muscles that had been tense for so long they had forgotten what relaxation felt like. Some women lay back in the tubs with their eyes closed, floating in the warmth, letting the water support their weight. Others sat hunched forward, scrubbing at their skin until it turned pink and raw, desperate to remove every trace of filth, every reminder of the months of degradation. The transformation took over an hour. No one rushed them. No one banged on the door demanding they hurry. They were simply allowed to take their time to wash as thoroughly as they wanted to soak until the water grew cool and had to be drained and refilled with more hot water. When they finally emerged wrapped in clean white towels that were soft and thick and warm from being stored near a heater, their skin was pink and raw from scrubbing, flushed with heat and the blood flow of warm water and vigorous cleaning. Their hair hung wet but clean, dripping water onto their shoulders, darker than it had been in months now that the dust and grease were gone. They felt lighter, as if the filth had been physical weight pressing down on them. Some felt dizzy from the heat and had to sit on benches to recover. Others felt energized, renewed, almost reborn. All of them felt the profound psychological impact of being clean. Outside the bathhouse, Dutch Henderson stood with Dr. Samuel Cohen, the facility's medical officer. "How bad are they?" "Sam, malnutrition, parasites, untreated wounds. One has tuberculosis. Several have infections. They have been starved." "Robert," slowly, systematically, for months, Dutch's hands clenched into fists. "And our boys in Japanese camps. Worse, far worse. You have read the reports from Cabana Tuan. Then why are we doing this?" "Because we are not them," Dr. Cohen interrupted quietly. "My entire family died in German camps, Robert. I have more reason than anyone here to hate Axis prisoners. But if I become like them, then Hitler wins. Even though he is dead, he wins." Dutch stared at the bathhouse door. "Bobby asked me to remember the Geneva Convention. Your son was a wise man. My son was 23 years old and died on a beach in Japan. And he died believing America stood for something better than revenge. Are you going to prove him wrong?" Inside the bathhouse, Michiko lowered herself into the hot water. For the first time in 8 months. The heat was almost painful. She slid down until water covered her shoulders, and then broke. Not from cruelty, from mercy. The kindness was worse than torture would have been. Torture she had prepared for. Torture she could have endured with her beliefs intact. But this hot water and soap and privacy and safety, this destroyed everything she had been taught about the enemy. Around the room, 72 other women wept into the steam. They had expected devils. They had been given dignity, and that contradiction would haunt them for the rest of their lives. In the next room, they found piles of clean clothes laid out in organized stacks according to size. Simple cotton dresses in various sizes, ranging from small to large, all in muted colors of blue and gray and green. Undergarments still in packages, never worn clean and new. Socks without holes, several pairs per person. Shoes that fit properly with intact soles and no holes. Each woman measured and given appropriate sizes. There were even sweaters for the cold weather, soft knitted things that looked handmade. Michiko caught sight of herself in a full-length mirror and barely recognized her own reflection. Her face was clean for the first time in months, skin pink from scrubbing features that had been obscured by dirt now visible again. Her hair, though still wet and plastered to her head, looked black again, instead of the dull gray-brown it had become under layers of dust and grease. Her body was thin too, thin ribs visible, and hip bones prominent, but it was clean. She looked human again. She looked like herself again. That realization hit harder than she expected. For months, she had felt like something less than human, something dirty and defeated and disposable. She had looked at her own hands and not recognized them, had avoided her reflection in any surface, because she could not bear to see what she had become. But now, clean and clothed in simple but whole garments, she looked like herself again. She looked like the nurse she had been before the war, like the daughter her parents had raised, like a person with dignity and worth. The women dressed in silence, still processing what had happened, still trying to integrate this new reality into their understanding of the world. This was not torture, this was not humiliation, this was care. The enemy had given them care. The contradiction was too large to absorb all at once, too profound to simply accept. So they simply moved through the motions, pulling on clean clothes, buttoning buttons, tying shoes. Each small act feeling surreal and impossible, and somehow threatening to the worldview they had held. After bathing, they were led to a mess hall. The building was simple but clean, with long tables arranged in rows and windows letting in afternoon light. The smell that filled the room made several women stop in their tracks. Food, real food. The aroma of cooked rice, vegetables, fish, something sweet baking. After months of watery soup and moldy rice, the smell alone was overwhelming. At the serving line, American cooks in white aprons stood ready. The women filed through, hesitantly accepting plates and utensils. The first woman in line received a portion of steamed white rice, clean and fluffy. Next came vegetables, carrots, and green beans cooked until tender. Then a piece of fish grilled and still hot. A slice of bread with butter, a small portion of fruit, a cup of hot tea. By the time Michiko reached the front of the line, her hands were shaking. She held out her plate and watched as the American cook filled it, more food than she had seen in a single meal in over a year. The rice alone would have been treasure. Everything else seemed like fantasy. She wanted to ask if this was real, if they were truly allowed to eat all of this, but she had no words the Americans would understand. The women sat at the tables in small groups, plates before them, afraid to begin. What if this was a test? What if they would be punished for eating? What if the food was poisoned? A final cruelty dressed up as kindness. They looked at each other, silently asking the same questions. Finally, one woman older than the rest, a former teacher named Fumiko, picked up her chopsticks. She took a small bite of rice, chewing slowly, testing for strange tastes. Finding none, she took another bite, then another. Around the room, the others began to eat. Michiko ate slowly at first, then faster as her body recognized real nourishment. The rice tasted clean, free of the mold and insects that had contaminated their rations for months. The vegetables were cooked perfectly, still with some texture, seasoned with just salt and butter. The fish flaked apart under her chopsticks, mild and fresh. She had forgotten food could taste like this. Tears began to fall again. She tried to stop them, embarrassed to cry while eating, but she could not help it. Around the room, others were crying too. Some ate and wept simultaneously, unable to separate the relief of being fed from the grief of all they had lost. Others put down their chopsticks, overwhelmed, and simply sat with their faces in their hands. One woman whispered to Michiko, "My brother starved to death on Guadalcanal, and here I sit eating fish and rice, like it is before the war." The guilt in her voice was sharp as broken glass. Michiko had no answer. She felt the same guilt, The same confusion, the same terrible relief. That evening, they were shown to their barracks. The building was simple but well-maintained with rows of metal frame beds covered in clean sheets and wool blankets. Each bed had a pillow. Each woman was assigned a footlocker for her belongings, though most had nothing to put in them. The room was heated against the October chill. Windows had glass that was not broken. The floor was swept clean. Michiko sat on her assigned bed, testing the mattress. It was thin, but clean, worlds better than the wooden planks or bare ground she had slept on for months. The pillow felt impossibly soft. The blankets smelled of laundry soap. She lay back carefully as if the bed might disappear if she moved too fast and stared at the ceiling. That night, as darkness fell and the lights were dimmed, the women whispered to each other across the space between beds. Their voices carried in the quiet, sharing confusion and fear and tentative hope. "What will they do to us tomorrow?" someone asked. No one had an answer. All they knew was that today had not been what they expected. Today, they had been treated like human beings. Morning came with a bell, not harsh or jarring, but clear and simple. The women rose from beds. They could hardly believe they had slept in bodies, rested in ways they had almost forgotten were possible. Breakfast was eggs, toast, rice porridge for those who preferred it, hot coffee or tea and fresh fruit. Once again, the quantity and quality shocked them. This was not punishment rations. This was food that actual people ate. The kind of meals they remembered from before the war, when Japan still had enough. After breakfast, they were assigned work details. The assignments were light: kitchen help, laundry duty, cleaning the barracks, tending small gardens on the facility grounds. They would be paid for their work, the officer explained through Dr. Tanaka, the translator, in camp script that could be used at the canteen. The women listened in bewilderment. Paid for light chores. What kind of prison was this? Michiko was assigned to the laundry. She worked alongside 3 other women, washing linens and clothes in machines that did most of the work automatically. Hot water poured from taps whenever needed. Soap was plentiful. The clothes came out clean and smelling fresh. It was easy work, almost boring in its simplicity. Nothing like the hard labor they had expected. During a break, one of the American supervisors, Sergeant Ruth Williams, a woman in her 30s with red hair, offered them coffee. She poured from a pot into clean cups, added sugar and cream without being asked, and set out a plate of cookies. The Japanese women accepted hesitantly, still waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the kindness to reveal itself as mockery or manipulation. But Ruth just smiled, said something in English they did not understand, and went back to her own work. The coffee was hot and sweet. The cookies were fresh, soft-studded with chocolate chips. Michiko ate slowly, savoring each bite, her mind struggling to reconcile this moment with everything she had believed about Americans. The days began to take on a rhythm. Wake, eat, work, eat, rest, eat, sleep. 3 meals a day every day, with portions that seemed generous even by pre-war standards. The work was manageable, often almost pleasant in its routine. The barracks remained clean and warm. Showers were available daily. Medical care was provided without question when needed. After the first week, they were allowed access to the canteen. Michiko and several others walked there together, curious and nervous. Inside, they found shelves stocked with items that seemed impossible. Chocolate bars, cigarettes, writing paper, and pens, small toiletries, even magazines and books. The prices listed in camp script were reasonable. Michiko had earned her first week's wages. She stood before the chocolate bars for a long time, staring at the bright wrappers. She had not tasted chocolate since 1941. Very carefully, she selected one and paid with her script. The American clerk smiled and said something friendly. Michiko bowed reflexively, then left quickly, clutching her purchase. Back in the barracks, she unwrapped the chocolate slowly, as if it might vanish. She broke off one small square and placed it on her tongue. The sweetness exploded in her mouth, rich and dark and real. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, she was a child again, receiving a special treat from her father. The memory hurt almost as much as it comforted, but the abundance carried its own special torture. 2 weeks after their arrival, letters began to arrive from Japan, passed through censors, but otherwise intact. The words they contained were devastating. Families writing about living in ruins, eating whatever they could find. Children sick from malnutrition. Elderly parents growing weaker by the day. One woman received a letter saying her mother had died in the winter, too weak to survive the cold and hunger. The contrast was impossible to bear. Here they sat in heated barracks, eating 3 meals a day, receiving medical care, even buying chocolate with their wages. Meanwhile, their families starved in the rubble of defeated Japan. The guilt became a physical weight. Some women stopped eating more than the minimum. Others cried through every meal. A few became angry, raging at the injustice of it all. Michiko's letter arrived on a cold November morning. She recognized her mother's handwriting immediately. Her hands shook as she opened it. My dearest Michiko, I have terrible news. Our house is gone. The March firebombing destroyed our entire neighborhood. I live now in shelter made from corrugated metal and wood scraps. Your father died in February. I did not tell you before because I did not want to burden you with grief when you were suffering in American captivity. I saved rice for 4 weeks to send you this package. I know the Americans must be starving you, torturing you. I know you must be cold and afraid and in pain. This rice ball is all I can send. Please eat it and know I love you. Please stay strong. Please survive whatever cruelty they inflict. Your loving mother who thinks of you every day and prays for your strength to endure the American devils. Michiko held the letter, stared at the rice ball wrapped carefully in clean cloth. Mother thought she was being tortured, starved, abused. Mother saved rice for 4 weeks. 4 weeks starving herself to send food to daughter who ate 3 American meals daily. Mother called them devils. Devils who gave hot water and soap. Devils who provided medical care. Devils who served fish and rice and fresh bread. The contradiction was too large to hold. That night in the barracks, Fumiko sat up in bed, spoke into darkness. How many of your families think we are being tortured, murmurs? Most hands raised in the dim light. How many of us are healthier now than when we arrived, all hands? How many of us eat better here than we did serving our own military paws? Then slowly every hand rose. Then we must face the truth. We were lied to, about Americans, about the war, about everything. One woman, older and rigid in her beliefs, protested. This is trick, propaganda. They want us to betray our values. Fumiko's voice came back sharp. What values? The values that sent us to die for lost cause. The values that let our families starve while generals ate well. What exactly are we betraying, Akemi, a young radio operator who had been quiet until now spoke from her bunk? If they lied about Americans being devils, what else did they lie about? Silence fell heavy in the darkness. Then voices began asking questions that could have gotten them killed in Japan. Was the war necessary? Did we ever have chance to win? Did our leaders know and send us anyway? Are Americans actually better than us? The questions multiplied, each one more dangerous than the last. Each one chipping away at the foundation of everything they had been taught. Michiko wrote in her diary by small flashlight characters cramped and tight. The hardest thing is not captivity. It is realizing the enemy treats us better than our own government did. That is what breaks you. Not cruelty, kindness. In his office that same night, Dutch Henderson sat at his desk going through medical reports. Major Hayes entered without knocking. Sir, we have a problem. What kind? Some of the prisoners are refusing to eat. Guilt about their families starving. One woman has not touched her mother's rice ball in 3 days. She is getting weaker. Dutch slammed his hand on the desk. Which one? Michiko Tanaka. The nurse. She keeps the diary. Dutch stood, walked to the window, looked out at the dark compound. He thought about Bobby, about sacrifice, about mothers everywhere who sent food to children, who gave their last portions to ensure someone they loved survived. Sam, he called to Dr. Cohen, who was passing in the hallway. I need advice. About what? If we are torturing them with kindness, should we stop? Dr. Cohen laughed bitterly. Robert, you cannot be serious. I'm making them feel guilty for surviving, for being healthy while their families starve. Is that cruel in a different way? Let me tell you about my family, Dr. Cohen said, stepping into the office. Parents, 2 brothers, sister, her 3 children, all dead in Auschwitz, gassed, burned, turned to ash. I could have died with them. I fled to America. I survived. I ate American food while they starved. I slept in warm bed while they froze. I lived while they died. Should I have starved myself in solidarity? Should I have felt such guilt I refused to live? He paused, his voice thick with emotion. No, Because my survival honors them more than my death would. My living a good life, treating others with dignity, being better than the monsters who killed them, that honors their memory. This woman, Machiko, she did not start the war. She did not choose to be captured. She is a victim of her government's lies as much as our boys were victims of their cruelty. If she survives healthy, she can return to Japan and help rebuild. She can tell others what America really is. She can be living proof that the propaganda was backwards. But if she starves herself from guilt, then the war wins. Then the lies win. Then everything, your son's death, her fiance's death, all the deaths, they mean nothing. Dutch stood silent for a long moment. I need to talk to her. You are the commander. That is unusual. Bobby would have talked to her. He would have found a way. So will I. The next morning, Dutch entered the barracks when Machiko was alone, weak from not eating, lying in her bunk. Dr. Tanaka accompanied him to translate. Machiko scrambled to sit up, terrified. The commander never came to barracks. Miss Tanaka, I understand you have something that belongs to your mother. Dr. Tanaka translated. Machiko nodded, pointed to rice ball on shelf above her bed. May I see it? Machiko retrieved it carefully. Hands shaking, gave it to Dutch. He examined it, this small ball of rice wrapped in clean cloth, this symbol of a mother's love and sacrifice. Your mother made this? Yes, sir. How long did she save rice to make it? 4 weeks, sir. The letter says 4 weeks, and she thinks we are torturing you. Yes, sir. She thinks I am starving, being beaten, suffering. Dutch sat on the bunk next to her, a shocking breach of protocol. Miss Tanaka, I am going to tell you something. My son died at Iwo Jima. He was 23 years old. A mortar round, probably fired by someone like your brother or fiancé or cousin, killed him instantly. Machiko's eyes widened, tears forming. I have every reason to hate you, every reason to make your life hell, every reason to take that rice ball and throw it away just to hurt you. He handed the rice ball back carefully. But my son asked me to be better than that. His last letter asked me to treat prisoners with dignity, to remember the Geneva Convention, to show the world what America really stands for. His voice hardened. Your mother saved rice for 4 weeks because she loves you, because she wants you to survive, because she wants you to eat and live and come home. And you are going to dishonor that sacrifice by starving yourself. You are going to waste her love out of guilt. Machiko was crying now, unable to stop. No, sir. But how can I eat when she starves? By surviving. Dutch said, his voice gentler but still firm. By getting strong, by going home healthy and taking care of her, by being living proof that Americans are not devils. Your mother will starve whether you eat or not. That is the tragedy. But you can choose to honor her sacrifice by surviving or waste it by dying from guilt. He stood, returned to military bearing. I am not asking you, Miss Tanaka. As your commanding officer, I am ordering you. Eat that rice ball, now, slowly. And remember that every bite is your mother's love. Every swallow is her hope that you will survive. Every moment you live is honoring her sacrifice. And when you go home, when this war is finally over and you return to Japan, you will be able to take care of her because you stayed strong. You ate. You lived. Do not betray her love by refusing it. That is not honor. That is waste. Machiko unwrapped the rice ball with shaking hands. Dutch stayed watched. She took small bite. It tasted like home, like mother's hands, like everything lost. And she wept while eating. Dutch wept too, thinking of Bobby, thinking of all the mothers who sent sons to die, thinking of all the sacrifices, all the waste. Two enemies sitting on bunk, both crying, both broken by this war in different ways. Dr. Tanaka stood by the door, weeping silently, watching this moment of shared humanity. After Machiko finished, she looked up at Dutch with red eyes. Thank you, sir, for making me eat, for understanding. I did not do it for you, Miss Tanaka, Dutch said, his voice rough with emotion. I did it because my son asked me to be better. You just happened to benefit. He walked to the door, paused. But for what it's worth, I am glad you are alive. I am glad you will go home. I am glad your mother will see you again. One family should survive this war intact. After he left, Machiko turned to the other women who had witnessed everything. He lost his son. To us. To Japan. And he still chose mercy. Fumiko nodded slowly. That is what America is. Not what they told us. What he just showed us. The following week, Dutch made an announcement. Thanksgiving was coming. American holiday, we give thanks for blessing share meal together. You are invited. The women were confused. Why invite prisoners to American holiday? Was this test? Was this mockery? In the kitchen, Sergeant Ruth Williams began teaching Japanese women to make stuffing cranberry sauce pumpkin pie. This is American tradition, Ruth explained through Dr. Tanaka. Every year, families gather, eat together. Remember what we are grateful for. Fumiko, working beside her, asked quietly, even during war, especially during war, Ruth replied, reminds us what we are fighting for. Family, home, freedom to gather and give thanks. In his office, Dutch sat with Major Elizabeth Hayes discussing the holiday. Sir, some of the men are uncomfortable. Sharing Thanksgiving with enemy prisoners. They are not enemy anymore, Major. War is over. They are prisoners under our protection. And on Thanksgiving, Americans share our table with everyone. Even people whose countrymen killed your son. Dutch's jaw clenched, his voice breaking slightly. Especially them. Because Bobby would want me to. Because that is what proves we are better. Because if I cannot share a meal with them, then what the hell did my son die for on November 22nd, 1945? Thanksgiving Day arrived. The mess hall had been transformed. Long tables arranged family style. American flags and autumn decorations hung on walls. Place settings for staff and prisoners alike. Turkey stuffing, sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce, green beans, rolls, pumpkin pie. More food than the prisoners had imagined possible in one meal. Americans and Japanese sat together at mixed tables. Dutch stood at the head table, raised a glass of water. On Thanksgiving, Americans give thanks for blessings. This year, I am thankful the war is over. I am thankful my daughter is safe. I am thankful we live in country where even enemies can sit at table together in peace. He paused, emotion visible in his face in the way his hand trembled slightly, holding the glass. I am thankful my son believed in American values strongly enough to die for them. And I am thankful to everyone here, American and Japanese, for honoring those values by choosing to see the humanity in each other. To peace, to dignity, to the hope that we can build a world where wars like this never happen again. Americans and Japanese raised glasses together, this simple gesture, bridging an ocean of pain and loss. Michiko tasted turkey for first time, the meat rich and savory, nothing like anything in Japan. Billy Reeves, a young American corporal sitting nearby, asked gently. Good, Michiko nodded, smiling despite tears streaming down her face. Fumiko found herself seated next to Dr. Cohen. May I ask personal question? Of course. You are Jewish. Yes. Your family died in German camps. Yes. Then why do you treat us with such kindness? We were allied with Germany. Our governments were partners. Dr. Cohen was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Because if I become like them, if I let hate turn me into monster, then Hitler wins. Even dead, he wins. But if I choose to be kind, to see humanity even in former enemies, then I win. Love wins. Humanity wins. Fumiko wept openly. You are better than I would be. I do not know if I could forgive enemies who killed my family. I have not forgiven Miss Yamamoto. I have just chosen not to let hate destroy me too. There is a difference. When pumpkin pie was served with whipped cream, Hana took her first bite. Sweet, creamy, spiced with cinnamon and nutmeg, a flavor she had never experienced. This is beautiful, she whispered, unable to find better words. Around the table, Japanese women discovering American dessert, weeping at simple sweetness. Americans watching, many with tears in their own eyes, seeing enemies become people, seeing kindness, defeating propaganda. Dutch observed from the end of the table. He saw enemies becoming human beings. Saw Americans and Japanese laughing together, passing dishes, sharing food. Saw kindness doing what weapons could not. Bobby, he thought, I hope you can see this. I hope wherever you are, you know I am trying. I am trying so hard to make your death mean something. That night, Michiko wrote in her diary, today I ate American Thanksgiving dinner. With Americans. At same table. As guest, not prisoner. Captain Henderson lost his son to us. Dr. Cohen lost his family because of our allies. Sergeant Williams lost friends at Leyte. Every American here has reason to hate us. But they chose to share their most important holiday with us. They chose to give thanks while including enemies at table. I understand now. This is what America is. Not military strength, though they have that. Not industrial power, though they showed us that in San Francisco. America is the choice to be kind when hate is easier, the choice to share when exclusion is justified, the choice to see humanity when propaganda says the enemy is devil. And that choice is more powerful than any weapon because it changes hearts, changes minds, changes understanding of entire world. I came here expecting torture. I am leaving with wisdom. The real American power is their values. And those values cannot be defeated by any military because they are true. Mother was wrong. We were all wrong. The devils were not Americans. The devils were the lies we believed. But mercy creates complications. As December arrived, Dutch faced new challenges. Word had spread beyond the facility. Families of American prisoners of war who had died in Japanese camps began writing letters, angry letters, demanding letters. How could the military treat Japanese prisoners so well when their sons had been starved and tortured? Was this betrayal? Was this dishonoring the dead? Dutch sat in his office reading the letters, each one a knife to the heart. One mother wrote, "My son weighed 80 pounds when they found him at Cabanatuan. He died 3 days after liberation. And you are feeding his murderers turkey and pumpkin pie." Another father demanded, "What kind of American officer gives comfort to the enemy while our boys died in agony?" Elizabeth stood across the desk watching him. "Sir, there is going to be a congressional inquiry. Veterans groups are demanding answers. How do you want to respond?" Dutch looked at Bobby's photograph on his desk. "The same way I have been, by following the Geneva Convention, by showing the world what American values mean, by honoring what our sons died for." But the pressure was mounting. He needed to do something visible, something that showed these prisoners were still working, still contributing, still earning their treatment. An opportunity arrived from an unexpected source. A telegram from Texas. Ranches desperate for workers. Men gone to war, crops rotting, cattle unattended. Could the military provide labor? Even enemy labor? Dutch saw his solution. He called the women together, made an announcement. Labor shortage in Texas. Ranches need workers for winter. Volunteers welcome. Light work supervised. Still prisoners, but different setting. Who wants to go? Michiko's hands shot up immediately. Fumiko's, Akemi's, Hannah's. 20 women total volunteered, eager for something new, eager to see more of America. 3 days later, they boarded a train heading south. The journey took 2 days, the landscape changing from California coast to desert to Texas plains. They pressed faces to windows, watching America unfold. Mountains and valleys. Small towns with white churches. Farms with red barns. Miles and miles of open land under enormous sky. This country was so vast, so rich, so untouched by war. How had Japan ever thought it could win? The ranch sat in West Texas flatland, stretching to horizons sky bigger than anything they had ever seen. The ranch house was white with a wide porch, barns painted red, corrals holding horses and cattle. A windmill turned slowly in the December breeze. Sergeant Jake Morrison waited for them, a man in his mid-30s with weather-worn face and a slight limp from childhood injury. He wore jeans, boots, a cowboy hat pulled low against the sun. "All right, ladies," he said through Dr. Tanaka, who had accompanied them. "Welcome to Texas. We got horses to feed fences, to mend cattle to tend. You will earn your keep, but first let me show you something." He led them to the barn, opened the wide doors. Inside stood rows of horses, beautiful animals with coats gleaming in the light, streaming through cracks in the wood. Their smell filled the space, hay and leather, and the warm scent of living things. "This here is Daisy," Jake said, leading out a gentle mare with soft brown eyes. "You ever ride a horse, miss?" He was looking at Michiko. She shook her head, fear and excitement warring in her chest. "Well, there is a first time for everything. Here." He helped her mount, his hands strong and sure, guiding her foot into the stirrup, steadying her as she swung her leg over. Michiko sat on horseback for the first time in her life. The world looked different from up here. She felt powerful. She felt free. She felt more American than she ever imagined possible. The horse shifted beneath her muscles, moving alive and responsive. Gently now, Jake instructed, standing beside her, one hand on the reins. She responds to kindness, not force, like most things. Over the following weeks, Michiko learned to ride. Fumiko learned, all of them learned. Cowboys teaching Japanese women to handle horses, to rope cattle, to work the land. American heartland culture shared with former enemies. The work was hard but satisfying. Physical labor under open sky. The women grew stronger, their bodies filling out muscles developing from real work and good food. Jake watched them transform with quiet satisfaction. He had felt shame about not serving about his bad leg keeping him from the fight. But teaching these women, showing them what America was through hard work and fair treatment, he began to understand. This was service too. This was showing the world what his country stood for. Not through bullets, but through example. December 25th arrived Christmas Day. Jake organized a barbecue Texas style. A pit dug in the ground the day before mesquite wood burning down to coals. Brisket rubbed with spices lowered onto the grill at dawn. The smell began before the sun rose, smoke carrying the scent of cooking meat across the ranch. Ribs, sausages, beans bubbling in cast iron pots, cornbread baking in Dutch ovens, apple pie cooling on the porch. The cowboys and Japanese women gathered around long tables set up outside under the enormous Texas sky. Christmas lights strung between posts, generator humming to power them. A radio played country music, Hank Williams singing about lost love and lonesome highways. The food was served family-style platters, passed hand to hand. Machiko tasted brisket for the first time, the meat so tender it fell apart, smoky and rich and unlike anything she had ever experienced. One of the younger cowboys, a boy barely 20, showed Fumiko how to two-step. The simple dance pattern shuffling in the dust beside the tables. She laughed, actually laughed for the first time since capture. The sound was startling, bright and genuine and full of life. Other women joined cowboys, teaching them American dance boots and bare feet moving together in the firelight. Jake approached Machiko as she sat watching, a soft smile on her face. "Got something for you," he said. He held out a cowboy hat, worn leather, with a braided band, clearly his own personal hat. "Merry Christmas, Miss Machiko. You earned it." She took it with trembling hands, placed it on her head. It fit perfectly. Tears streamed down her face as she wore it, this symbol of American culture, this gift of inclusion. One of the cowboys had a camera, a boxy Kodak. He took a photograph that night. Machiko in a cowboy hat, smiling, surrounded by American cowboys and Japanese women, and the vast Texas sky behind them. That photograph would hang in her home in Japan for the rest of her life, a reminder of the night she felt truly American, even as a prisoner of war. But all things must end. In early January, word came from Dutch. Time to return to San Francisco. Repatriation being arranged. Ships would leave for Japan in February. The women gathered their few belongings, said goodbye to the horses they had learned to love, to the cowboys who had treated them with respect and kindness. Jake shook each woman's hand, his grip firm and honest. "You did good work here. You made me proud to be American. Because we showed you what we really are." Back in San Francisco, the facility felt different now, smaller somehow. The women had seen more of America, had experienced its diversity, its vastness, its generosity. Dutch called them together on January 10th. "You are going home. Ships leaving February 15th. Japan is under American occupation. Your families need you. Time to go." The reactions were complicated. They wanted to see their families desperately, but they feared what they would find. Destruction, starvation, death. They feared how they would explain their treatment. How could they tell starving mothers they had eaten well? How could they describe kindness to people who had been taught Americans were devils? Some admitted quietly, shamefully, that part of them did not want to leave. This country had shown them something their own had not. Hope, dignity, the possibility of being more than what propaganda defined. Machiko wrote in her diary, "Going home should make me happy, but I am afraid. What if mother died during winter? What if she hates me for being healthy? What if no one believes Americans were kind, and the shameful truth I can barely write? Part of me does not want to leave. This country showed me kindness I never imagined. How do I return to Japan knowing America is better?" The final weeks passed quickly. February 14th arrived, the last night before departure. The mess hall was transformed for a farewell ceremony. American flags hung beside cherry blossom branches from the facility garden, spring just beginning to show. Dutch stood before the assembled women and staff, his face showing every one of his 42 years, the weight of command and loss and complicated mercy. "You came here as enemies," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. You leave as people I have come to respect. You have shown dignity in captivity, strength in adversity, willingness to question what you were taught and see truth. I hope you carry forward one message, that Americans are not devils, that we follow rules even when it is hard, that we treat prisoners with dignity because we value dignity, not because you earned it. When you rebuild Japan, remember this. When you tell your children about the war, tell them about this too. Tell them enemies can show mercy. Tell them propaganda lies. Tell them kindness is more powerful than hate. Tell them what you saw here, what you experienced here, what you learned here. That is how we prevent the next war, by telling the truth. The Americans had prepared small packages, bars of soap wrapped in paper, chocolate, writing paper and pens, photographs of the women at the facility during Thanksgiving at the Texas ranch. Small things but thoughtful, personal. The women had nothing material to give in return, but Fumiko had written haiku for each staff member who had shown them particular kindness, brushed characters on cards, each one personal and specific. For Dutch, she had written winter cherry blooms, enemy shows Mercy's son's death finds meaning. He read it through tears, folded it carefully, placed it in his breast pocket next to Bobby's last letter. Thank you, Miss Yamamoto. I will keep this forever. Michiko approached Dutch, her English much improved after 5 months. Captain Henderson, she said, her voice shaking but clear. Thank you. You show me Americans are good people. You show me your son's memory lives in how you treat enemies. You show me kindness can defeat hate. She paused, gathering courage. I am sorry. Sorry for your son. Sorry for war. Sorry for everything my country did to yours. Dutch looked at this small woman who had been his enemy, who had become something else through these months. Something like a reminder that beneath uniforms and flags, people were just people. I am sorry too, Miss Tanaka. Sorry you were lied to. Sorry you lost your fiancé. Sorry your family suffered. Sorry this war happened at all. He paused, his voice thick. But I am glad you are alive. I am glad you will go home. I am glad you will tell others what really happened here. That is how we prevent the next war. By telling the truth. Dutch opened his arms, breaking every protocol, every rule about fraternization with prisoners. Michiko stepped into the embrace. Enemy commander and enemy prisoner. Both crying, both changed by this impossible mercy. Around the room, other embraces were happening. Ruth and Akemi holding each other. Billy Reeves bowing to the woman he had guarded. She bowing back, both understanding. Something words could not capture. The next morning, February 15th, 1946, the women boarded the ship that would take them home. The journey took 3 weeks, the Pacific crossing in reverse. They talked endlessly about what they would say, how they would explain, how they would make people understand that everything they had been taught was backwards. Landing in Yokohama was surreal. The port was damaged, but functioning, managed by American occupation forces. American MPS directing traffic. American flags on Japanese soil. The city beyond was a mixture of ruins and hasty reconstruction. People looked thin and tired, moving through rubble with exhausted determination. This was home, but it felt foreign, felt damaged beyond recognition. Michiko made her way to Osaka, to the neighborhood where her family had lived. The house was gone, destroyed in March firebombing. But her mother was alive, living in a shelter built from salvaged materials, corrugated metal and wood planks barely standing. The reunion was overwhelming. Her mother emerged from the shelter, saw Michiko, a moment of non-recognition. This healthy woman could not be her starving prisoner daughter. Then Michiko, they held each other, weeping, words tumbling out. Her mother held her at arm's length, studying her face, confusion clear. You look healthy. I thought you would be starved, beaten. I thought the Americans would torture you. I thought you would come back broken if you came back at all. Michiko struggled with how to explain, how to tell the truth without causing pain, but slowly, carefully, she told it. The bathtubs with hot water, the 3 meals every day, the medical care, the work that was light and paid, the Americans who chose kindness when cruelty was easier, the captain who had lost his son but still showed mercy, the doctor who had lost his family to Germany but still treated Japanese prisoners with care. Her mother listened in silence, face unreadable. When Michiko finished, her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice small and wondering. I am glad they did not harm you. I am glad you survived. I was so afraid. Every night I imagined terrible things. But you are here, you are alive. You are my daughter, that is all that matters. She paused, looking at her daughter's healthy face, the weight she had gained, the strength in her body. And perhaps we were lied to about many things. Over the following months and years, Michiko adjusted to life in occupied Japan. She found work with the occupation forces, her English skills valuable. She translated, she assisted with reconstruction planning, she helped bridge the gap between occupiers and occupied. She used her health, the strength she had gained in American captivity, to support her mother to help rebuild. She stayed in touch with some of the women from the facility. Fumiko, Akemi, Hana. They met occasionally, sharing tea and memories that no one else could truly understand. They had lived through something unique, a transformation that had reshaped their understanding of the world. They had been enemies who were shown kindness. They had been prisoners who were treated with dignity. They had learned that the categories of good and evil, us and them, were never as simple as they seemed. In 1952, Michiko married a veteran named Hiroshi who had lost his leg at Burma. He too struggled with the gap between propaganda and reality, between what they had been told and what had actually happened. They understood each other's complexity, the way the war had broken, and remade them. They had two children, a daughter Yuki born in 1953, a son Takeshi born in 1955. Michiko told her children about the war, but not the propaganda version. She told them about complexity, about how people on all sides had suffered, about how enemies could show mercy and allies could fail you. She told them about the bathtubs in California, about hot water and soap and the unexpected kindness of strangers, about Captain Henderson, who honored his son's memory through mercy, about Dr. Cohen, who chose not to let hate destroy him, about cowboys in Texas who taught Japanese women to ride horses. Her daughter asked once, when she was 10 years old, "Did you hate the Americans?" Mother Michiko thought carefully before answering. "I was taught to hate them. From childhood, we were told Americans were barbarians, devils, monsters. When I was captured, I expected torture, violation, death. I was prepared to die hating them. But they showed me something different. They showed me that even in war, people can choose to be decent. That small decision to treat prisoners well, to give us soap and food and dignity, it changed my whole life. It taught me that hate is a choice, and so is kindness. Every day, every interaction we choose. The Americans at that facility chose to be kind when cruelty was easier, when hatred was justified, when revenge would have been understood. That choice, that deliberate choice to be better, was more powerful than any weapon. It broke down everything I believed. It forced me to see them as human. And if they were human, then what did that make the war? What did that make all our sacrifices? Kindness was the weapon I had no defense against. The years passed. Michiko's mother died in 1978, peaceful and surrounded by family. Hiroshi died in 1995 from heart disease. Japan transformed around them, rising from ruins to become an economic power, a democracy, an ally of the very nation that had defeated them. The irony was not lost on Michiko. The enemy had become friend. The victor had helped the vanquished rebuild. American values, the ones Captain Henderson had embodied, had proven true. In October 2002, Yuki, now 49 years old, traveled to California. She wanted to see the place where her mother's transformation had begun. She found the old facility, now a museum, the California Women's POW historical site. The buildings were preserved, the grounds maintained. Exhibits told the story of the 73 Japanese women, the treatment that had contradicted propaganda, the transformation through kindness. Yuki walked through, slowly seeing the bathhouse with its white tiles still gleaming. The clawfoot tubs preserved, a sign explaining here, 73 Japanese women prisoners experienced unexpected humanity. She saw the mess hall where Thanksgiving had been shared. She saw photographs of the women, including one of her mother, young and thin and frightened, standing with other prisoners. The museum director approached a woman in her 60s, professional and kind. "Are you here about family?" Yuki nodded. "My mother was a prisoner here. Michiko Tanaka. She worked in the laundry. She said a Captain Henderson showed her kindness." The director's face changed, something like wonder crossing her features. "Wait here, please." She disappeared into an office, returned moments later with an elderly man. He was in his 80s, dignified with military bearing, still evident in his posture. "This is Robert Henderson," she said, "Captain Henderson's grandson." He approached Yuki slowly, his eyes bright with emotion. Your mother, he said, his voice rough with age and feeling. She was the one my grandfather wrote about, the one who changed his life. He showed Yuki a leather journal worn and carefully preserved. Dutch's diary kept throughout his command of the facility. Entries about Machiko, about choosing mercy, about honoring Bobby's memory, about the rice ball incident, about Thanksgiving, about everything. The final entry was dated 1975, the year before Dutch died. Saw Machiko's Christmas card today. Photo of her family in Japan. Thriving, happy, healthy. Bobby, if you can see this, I hope you know I kept my promise. I showed them what America is, and they took that knowledge home. Maybe that is how wars really end, not with treaties or bombs, but with kindness that echoes through generations, with mercy that plants seeds of peace. I miss you every day, son, but I think I finally understand what you were trying to tell me, that the measure of a man is not how well he fights enemies, but how well he treats them when he wins. I hope I made you proud. Yuki and Robert stood together, descendants of enemies, both crying, sharing family stories across the gap of history and loss. Your grandfather saved my mother's life, Yuki said, not just physically, spiritually. He showed her that hate was not inevitable, that people could choose to be better. He honored his son, Robert replied. Every day, every decision, every act of mercy, he carried that weight for the rest of his life. But I think it gave him peace too. Purpose. A way to make the death mean something. On March 4th, 2003, Machiko lay in a hospital bed in Osaka, 86 years old, pneumonia settling into her lungs. Yuki sat beside her, holding her hand. Emi, Yuki's daughter, 18 years old and home from university, sat on the other side. Grandmother Emi asked what was the hardest part of the war. Machiko's breath was labored, but her mind was clear. Not the captivity, she said slowly. Not the hunger. Not the fear. The hardest thing was the kindness. Her voice was barely a whisper now, Yuki and Emi leaning close to hear. Because hatred I could have endured with my beliefs intact. Cruelty I was prepared for. I expected it. I had been trained for it since childhood. But kindness that destroyed everything. When Captain Henderson gave me dignity, when he forced me to eat my mother's rice ball, when he hugged me at the farewell, each act of kindness was a crack in the armor of hate I had been taught to wear. It forced me to see them as human. And if they were human, then what did that make the war? What did that make all our sacrifices? What did it make the propaganda that said they were monsters? Kindness was the weapon I had no defense against. It broke me open. It made me question everything. It forced me to rebuild my entire understanding of the world. She paused, breathing with difficulty. And you know what the truly hard part is? I am grateful. After everything, the war, the loss, the destruction, I am grateful I was captured. I am grateful I was broken by kindness, because it taught me the most important lesson of my life. Her eyes closed, her voice fading. That we always have a choice, even in humanity's darkest hours, even when hatred seems easier, even when revenge seems justified. We can choose to be decent. We can choose to see the human in our enemy. We can choose kindness. That choice, that simple, difficult choice, can change the world. One person at a time, one act of mercy at a time. Tell that story. Tell it to your children. Tell them about the bathtubs in California. Tell them about lavender soap and hot water and the unexpected humanity of former enemies. Tell them that kindness matters, that mercy matters, that choosing to be better than our worst impulses, that is what makes us human. Her breath grew shallow. Captain Henderson chose mercy when revenge was easier. And it changed me. Changed 73 women. Changed how we saw the world. Changed what we taught our children. That is the legacy. Not weapons, not victory. Kindness. Choosing to be better. She died peacefully. Yuki and Emi holding her hands, her last words about mercy and transformation echoing in the quiet hospital room. If you enjoyed this story, if it showed you what American values truly mean, please like and subscribe. Share this with veterans in your family. Share this with anyone who needs to remember what makes America exceptional. Not our military power, but our moral courage. Our ability to choose kindness when hate is easier. These stories matter. They need to be told. especially now, especially always. This is the story worth remembering, not because it is comfortable, but because it is true. It reminds us that human beings are capable of both tremendous cruelty and unexpected grace. It shows us that transformation is possible even in the most unlikely circumstances. That minds can change when confronted with undeniable reality. That choosing mercy requires more courage than choosing vengeance. Captain Dutch Henderson died in 1976, having never stopped honoring his son's memory. Machiko lived until 2003, telling her story to anyone who would listen. Of the 73 Japanese women who passed through that facility, 71 survived to return home. They became teachers, mothers, nurses, voices for peace. They told their children about American kindness, about hot water and lavender soap, about officers who chose mercy when revenge was justified, about a country that lived up to its values even when it was hard. The bathtubs of San Francisco were more than bathtubs. They were symbols of transformation, of propaganda meeting reality, of hate confronting kindness. And kindness won every time, because it always does if we are brave enough to choose it. That legacy lives on, in every choice to show mercy, in every decision to see humanity in our opponents, in every moment we choose to be better than our worst impulses. That is what makes America exceptional. Not our military might, but our moral courage, our ability to choose kindness when hate is easier, our commitment to values that transcend nationality, race, and history of conflict. The measure of strength is not how well you destroy enemies, but how well you treat them when you win. That is the lesson Captain Henderson taught. That is the wisdom Machiko carried home. That is the truth their descendants shared in a California museum 57 years later. And that is the message we need today. The choice to be kind, the decision to show mercy, the courage to treat enemies like human beings. That is how wars truly end. That is how peace truly begins. That is what America at its best has always stood for. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share. These are the stories that prove what American values truly mean, and they need to be told, especially now, especially always.